ॐ ब्रह्मानन्दं परमसुखदं केवलं ज्ञानमूर्तिं द्वन्द्वतीतं गगनसदृशं तत्त्वमस्यादिलक्ष्यम् एकं नित्यं विमलमचलं सर्वधी साक्षिभूतम् भावातीतं त्रिगुणरहितं सद्गुरुं तं नमामि. Shivam friends, today we will take reading of chapter 47th onwards of Upasna Khand. In this chapter, a traveler and a journey verify Gadhi's dream. Vasishtha resumed. Soon, Gadhi was relieved from the disturbances of his mind at the delusions of the world. He was set to rest from his perturbed state, like the disturbed sea after its waves subside. His mind, freed from its painful thoughts, regains its repose after the troublesome dream passed away. He resumed his calmness, like the god Brahma having his rest after the labor of his creation was over at the end of a kalp. He slowly regained his senses, like a man waking from sleep, and like one gains sobriety after passing off his inebriation. Then he thought to himself, I am the same Gadhi, doing the same thing I was doing. All that I have been seeing for so long is nothing. This I see as clearly as man sees things after the shade of night is dispersed. Remembering what he was, he lifted his feet from the water like a lotus bud lifting its head above water in spring after the frost is over. He thought again, this is the same water, sky and earth, but what I was just seeing is quite astonishing to me. What am I and what do I see now? What was I and what have I been doing all this time? He remained a long time with these thoughts, knitted brows and staring eyes. It was my weakness, he thought, that showed me this delusion. Knowing it for certain, he came out of the water like the rising sun appearing above the horizon. Then, rising on the bank, he thought, ah, where is my mother and wife who attended on me at the moment of my death? Or were my parents dead in the ignorant state of my boyhood, like the parent plant of a young shoot cut off by the sword of death? I'm not married, and I don't know the form of a wife. I am as ignorant of married love as a Brahmin is a stranger to the destructive taste of forbidden liquor. I am too far from my country and know no friend or relative to whom I can return to die. Therefore, all these scenes that I have seen are no more than the forms of a fairyland pictured in my fancy. Be it as it may, all this is only delusion and dream. We are living dead among our friends. It is all magic and delusion, and nothing is true or real here. Our minds are like wild beasts roaming furiously in the forest of errors, which presents endless scenes of delusion to living beings. Reflecting on these delusions in the mind, Gadhi passed some days at his own house in the woods. Then, once he happened to entertain a Brahmin as a guest at his house, he had stayed there to take rest from his travels. The visitor was highly gratified, feasting upon fruit and flowers, syrups. He was as refreshed, supplied with water as a tree supplied by a plentiful spring that in time shoots forth with a foliage and fruit. Then they performed their evening service and turned their beads. Afterwards, they took to their beds made of tender leaves and grass. There they began to talk on divine subjects with which they were conversant. Words fell up from lips like the sweets of a spring season. In the course of their conversation, Gadhi asked his guest, "Why is it, sage, that you are so thin and lean and appear to lie so very weary?" The guest replied, "Sage, hear me explain the cause of both my leanness and weariness. I will tell you the true facts, not like a traveling teller of tales, deals, and lies. In this land, in the forest tracts of the north, there is the great kingdom of Kirapura, which is renowned for its riches. I lived in the city there and was honored by its inhabitants. My soul and mind were mightily pleased with the variety of dainty foods that I used to get there. There, someone told me by way of gossip that a tribal had once been the king of that country for 8 years. I asked the village people whether this report was true, and they all told me with one voice that a tribal had really ruled there for full 8 years. But at last, being discovered as such, he immolated himself on a burning pyre, which was followed by the self-immolation of hundreds of Brahmins on their funeral pyres. Hearing this news from their mouths, I departed from the district, intending, O Brahmin, to do penance by making a pilgrimage to Prayag. I made my Chandrayan fast for 3 days and nights and broke my fast only today. This is why I have become so thin and lean, as you find me, Vasishtha said. On hearing this, Gadhi asked 100 questions of his guest about the matter, to which all his guests' answers verified that verified what had happened. Gadhi was quite surprised at this story and passed the night till sunrise with his heart throbbing. Waking in the morning, he made his sacred bath and discharged his morning prayers. Then he took leave of his guest and began to reflect with bewildered understanding. He said to himself, "What I saw in my delusion is ratified as a fact by my Brahmin guest. I am puzzled to think whether this is magic or fascination of the conjurer Sambara. What I saw about my death among my relatives was undoubtedly a delusion of my mind, but the later part of my vision is verified by the Brahmin's observance of the Chandrayan penance for having entered the tribal city. Therefore, I must fully learn the details about this tribal and proceed immediately to the land of Bhuta district with an undaunted mind." Thus determined, Gadhi arose to visit the distant district, just as the sun rises over the horizon, to visit all sides of Mount Sumeru. He travelled onward and at last reached sight of the country he had seen in his dream. Like intelligent wayfaring men reach their desired destinations in distant regions. Finding everything, however unattainable it may first appear, to be attained by perseverance, Gadhi resolved to test the truth of his delusive dream. He left his home with the swiftness of a stream flooded in rainy weather and traversed many unknown countries, like a cloud passing over distant kingdoms on the back of its airy steed. At last he came to the country of the Bhutas, a people following their own debased customs. He thought he was among a savage people, like a camel searching for thorny thistles is confounded to find it has fallen in a Kiranja forest. There he saw a city like he had seen in his delusion. In every respect it resembled a place where the Gandharv race lived. Proceeding onward, he saw on the other side of the land of the tribals, which resembled the hell pit of the underworld. It was as spacious as the place he had seen in his vision. He saw his own likeness in the dream, appearing in the figures of the tribals. Just as one sees the shape of a Gandharv or ghost in his dream or delirium, in that dwelling place of tribals, he saw with grief and coldness of his mind what he had seen before in his delusion. He saw his own hut, flooded by rainwater and overgrown with sprouts of barley and brambles. His hut was left roofless, and his bedstead was almost indiscernible. His nut presented the picture of poverty and wretchedness. His hut, its compound was a scene of ruin and desolation. Gandhi, Gadhi stood long gazing upon the dry white bones of bulls, cows, buffaloes, and horses that lay strewn over the ground around his hut. He remembered they were the remains of the beasts of his prey and slaughter. He saw the dry hollow skulls lying on the ground which had served as his eating and drinking vessels and which still lay unmoved on the spot filled with rainwater. He saw strings of dried entrails from the beast he had slaughtered lying like parched plants on the ground and pinning with thirst for rainwater. Gadhi, who was conscious of himself as the Brahmin, looked long at his former house and its environments, resembling the dry and dilapidated skeleton of a human body lying unburied on open ground. He stood amazed at what he saw, then withdrew to an adjacent village, as when a traveler returns to the land of the Aryans after a journey in the land of barbarians. There he asked a person, Sage, do you remember anything concerning the former state of that village and the lives of its tribal inhabitants? I have heard all good people say that knowledgeable men are familiar with the history of all places, which they know like the backs of their hands. If you know anything about a good old tribal that lived in that village, and if you remember his adventures, as everyone does the past accidents of his own life, and if you are acquainted with the details, then please relate them to me. For it is said, there is great merit in directing a stranger and in dispelling the doubts of one hanging in suspense. The Brahmin, who was a stranger, asked such questions of the village people one by one. They were as surprised at his odd questions as physicians are at patients' strange complaints. The villager said, it is an undeniable truth of Brahmin, as you say, that a tribal of hideous shape named Katanj lived at that place. He was burdened by a large family consisting of his sons, grandsons, friends, and servants. He also had other relatives and kinsmen. His children were as many as fruit on a mango tree, but cruel fate snatched all his family in course of time. Like a fire burning down a mountain forest with all its fruits and flowers. Then he left his native land and went to the city of Kira, where he became king and reigned there for 8 years. Afterwards, the citizens came to know of his mean origin and drove him away, just as they remove a harmful and poisonous tree from a garden. He, seeing others immolating themselves on a funeral pyre, entered a burning pyre which he had prepared for himself and thus was purified with others by the sacred fire Pavak. But tell us, O Brahman, why you are so curious about the tribal? Was he a friend of yours? Being approached in this manner, Gadhi made many more inquiries concerning the tribal and passed a whole month in several of their houses asking questions. He told the village people everything that he knew of the tribal in his dream, and they listened to him attentively, relating the whole story from first to last. Gadhi, being informed of all the particulars regarding the tribal, both from the hearsay of the people as well as from his personal observations, returned home equally ashamed and astonished with the disgraceful memory of his past vileness, which was stamped like the black spot on the moon upon the tablet of his mind. Gadhi verifies his dream again. Vishnu explains the wonderful power of illusion. Vasishtha continued, Gadhi was bewildered with all that he heard and saw about the tribal and his home. He felt uneasy and wanted to learn more. He went back to the village and saw the huts that lay scattered upon the plain, as when the lotus-born Brahma looks over the ruins made by the great deluge at the end of a Kalp age. He thought to himself, those bones lying scattered about the ruined huts in the forest look like little Pishach ghosts gathered round the trees standing on a burial ground. These posts and pegs of elephants' tusks fastened on the walls of ruined houses look like the crags of Mount Meru drowned under the waters of the Kalp deluge. Here the tribal feasted on monkey flesh dressed with young bamboo sprouts. There he caroused with his country, grog in company with his drunken friends. Here he slept on his bed of lion's skin in the embrace of his murky spouse, drunk with liquor mixed with ichor fluid from elephant noses. There a pack of hounds used to be tied to the trunk of the withered bhareda tree, fed with the rotten flesh of putrid carcasses. Here I see three earthen vessels covered with buffalo hide, resembling fragments of dark clouds, and which had once contained precious pearls falling from the skulls of slain elephants. I see the place I saw in my dream where tribal children played in the dust with as much glee and gaiety as cuckoos flitting on the tufts of mango leaves. I see the place I saw in my vision where children sang to the tune of their bamboo pipes, drank the milk of bitches, and decorated themselves with flowers from funeral grounds. Here, the families of wedding parties met to celebrate their marriage festivity, dancing and singing as loudly as the noise of the dashing waves of the sea. There I find bamboo cages still suspended high, which used to be laid to catch flying birds for food. Vasishtha resumed. Thus, Gadhi remained for a long time in that place, seeing all that what he remembered to have seen in his dream. He was lost in wonder to think on the miraculous disclosure of these things in his dream. Then he left for a long time, traveled through many countries beyond the boundaries of Bhuth district. He passed over many rivers and rocks and through many deserts and forests until he reached the snowy mountain and the lands of humankind beyond its borders. He arrived at Kira, the city of a great monarch, its towers rising like hills upon the earth. There he stopped after his long journey, like when sage Narad rests in his heavenly dome after the fatigue of traveling through numerous worlds. In that city, he saw all the places that matched the romantic thoughts in his mind, the ones he had seen and enjoyed in his dream. He respectfully asked some residents, good sirs, do you remember anything about the tribal king who reigned here for some time? If you do, please tell me in its proper order. The locals replied, yes, O Brahman. There reigned here a tribal king for full 8 years. He was elected to its government by kingdom's auspicious elephant. In the end, he was discovered to be so vile a race that he committed self-immolation on a funeral pyre. It has been a dozen years since that dire event took place. In this way, the inquisitive Gadhi continued asking questions of every man he met and was satisfied to learn the same information from the mouths of everybody there. Then he saw the king of that city in procession with his bodyguards and vehicles on their way going out of the city. Gadhi recognized them as none other than the god Vishnu and his attendants, just as he had seen in his tapas. He saw the sky shadowed by the cloud of dust raised by the feet of the passing procession. Then he remembered with sadness the similar state of his pomp under his own past reign. He thought to himself, here are the same Kira ladies with their rosy skins resembling lotus petals, and those with their bodies blazing as liquid gold, their blue eyes trembling like blue lotuses. The waving of fans flash with the light of bright moonbeams, and resembles the falling waters of a cascade and clusters of cuss flowers. Beautiful maidens, waving snow white fans in their beautiful hands, resemble forest plants with pearly flowers on their branches. Rows of furious elephants standing on both sides of the field are like thick lines of kalp trees growing on ridges of Sumeru mountain. These chieftains resemble the gods Yam, Kuber, and Varun, the lord of waters. They are like the rulers of the different quarters of the sky, accompanying Indra, the lord of heaven. These long lines of good buildings, each full with a great variety of things and abounding in all sorts of comforts, resemble a grove of wish fulfilling culp tree conferring on all the objects of desire. In this royal city of Kira, and in the manners of its assembled people, I see exactly the same customs and usages as those of the kingdom of Kirapura in my past life. Truly, this is only a vision in my dream which appears as a reality in my waking state. I cannot understand why this delusive magic show is spread out before me. Oh, yes, I am as fast bound by my ignorance and captivated by my memories like a captive bird in a net that has lost all power over itself. Oh, fie! My silly mind is so deluded by its desires that it is always mistakes shadow for substance, or people dwelling in their castles in the air. This is extraordinary magic. I believed Vishnu, the holder of the discus, is showing me this. I remembered I asked him for the favor of showing delusion to me. Now I will undertake austere tap in the cavern of a hill in order to learn the origin and existence of delusion. Having long thought in this manner, Gadhi left the city and came to a cave in a mountain where he rested after all his travels and mental exertions. Like a lion tired with roaming for food, he remained there for a whole year, living only on water from waterfalls collected in the hollow of his palm. He devoted himself to the worship of Vishnu, the holder of the bow named Sarangi. Then the lotus-eyed god appeared to him in his pale blue form, which was clear and graceful to sight as a clear lake in autumn with blue lotuses in full bloom. With this form, the god approached the hermit's cell in the mountain and stood over it like a transparent watery cloud rest on humid atmosphere. The Lord spoke to him, saying, Gadhi, you have fully seen the great spell of my magic, and know the network of delusion which destiny spreads over all the affairs of this world. Now you well understand the nature of the delusion, which in your heart you did desire to know. What is it again that you want to know through these austerities in this mountain cave? Vashiji said, Gadhi, the best of Brahmins, seeing Vishnu addressing him in this manner, honored him duly by scattering plentiful flowers at his divine feet. After Gadhi has made his offering of flowers with due obeisance and circumambulating the god, he addressed the god with words as sweet as the notes of a chatak cuckoo to a blooming lotus. Gadhi said, Lord, I have seen the dark delusion that you showed me in her form of gloom. Now I pray that you show her to me in her fair form, like the sun appearing after the gloom of night. The mind, wakened by the dirt of its desires, sees a great many errors rising before it, like false phantoms and visions in a dream. But, my Lord, how is it that the same visions continue to be seen in the waking state? When I stood in the waters, I experienced a false dream that I thought lasted only a moment. How was it, O enlightener of the mind, that it became manifest to my outward sense and sight? Why wasn't the delusion of my birth and death as a trial, which took place long ago, confined only to my memory like other ideal creations of the brain? How could I have recently verified my delusions as tangible to my naked eyes by many visible signs? Lord replied, Gadhi, it is the nature of delirium, like one's desires, to present many false appearances to view, and to make one believe what he has never seen before to be present to his external sight, which in reality is only a vision of his mind. There is nothing like the earth, sea, hills, or sky on the outside of anybody. They are all contained in the mind, like the fruit, flowers, and leaves of the trees are born in the seed and grow from its germ. Like fruit and flowers growing out of the seed and its sprout, this earth and all other things are all productions of the mind alone. They are not distinct from it in their essences. Know for certain that this earth and all other things are situated in the mind and not outside of it, just as fruit, flowers, and leaves are all contained inside the seed and not outside. The sight of things present and the thoughts of the absent past and unseen future are all only acts of the mind, just as the making and unmaking of pots are the doings of the potter. Whatever notions exist in the minds of man from their youth to old age are the same as the phantoms of their dreams or the deliriums of their intoxication or some mental disease. The established desires of the mind present a thousand appearances before its sight, just as the rooted plants on earth abound with fruit and flowers of various kinds. But when plants are uprooted, there remains no trace of fruit or flower or leaf upon the ground. So desires, having been driven out of the mind, there is no more any trace of anything left behind, nor is there any probability of future reincarnations when the memory of the past is utterly obliterated from the soul. It is no wonder for the shifting stage of the mind to present you with a single scene of the tribal. It has in store and can with equal ease show you an infinity of appearances at its pleasure. The impression in your mind made you think of yourself as the tribal in the manner that many phantoms arise before the mind in the delirium of a sick person. The same frenzy made you see the arrival of your Brahmin guest and entertain him with board and bad. All your conversations with him were only the fantasies of your mind. Then the thoughts of leaving home and arriving at Bhoot district, your sight of the Bhutas and their villages and homes were only aberrations of your mind. Next, your sight of the ruins of former huts of Katanj and the descriptions of the tribal that you got from the mouths of the pupil were all the fumes of your fancy. Afterwards, your visit to the city of Kira and the tale told you of the tribal's rule by the people were the reflections of your own mind. Thus, all that you heard and saw were the network of your imagination. What you believe as true is as false as a fantasy in your brain. The mind, infatuated by its hopes and desires, sees everything before it, no matter how distant it may be. One dreams of objects as present before him, which would take a whole year for him to reach. There was no guest or city, no Bhut district or Kirapura that you saw in reality. It was all a daydream that you saw with your mind's eye. The truth is that at one time on your way to the country of the Bhutas, you did stay in a mountain cave like a stag resting in a forest after his long wandering. Where, being tired from your travel, you fell into a sound sleep and dreamed of the Bhoot city and the travel, all in your reverie without seeing anything in reality. It was there and in the same state of mind that you saw the city of Kira. It was the delusion of your mind that showed you those things when you were performing your devotion in the water. In this manner, you saw many other things whenever you went, anytime, just like one flying high sees everything all about him. Rise therefore and remain unshaken in the discharge of your duties without being misled by the changes of your mind, because it is practice of one's profession that leads him to success, and not the ideals or his mind. Vasishtha said, so saying, the lotus navel Vishnu, who is worshipped by saints and sages in all places, went to his abode in the sea, where he was received by the hands of gods and holy sages, who led him to his residence. So, with this, chapter 48 comes to an end, and we rest our today's reading session here itself. Thanks to Lord Ram for the conclusion of this session. And I pray to the Lord again. We meet tomorrow with the reading session of chapter 49 onwards. Until then, Shivoham, friends.